And we're back live here on Patreon for the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp. Kevin, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jason.
Thanks for joining me tonight. Let's get right into it, Kevin, because I know you've got quite a bit of information to share with us today. You've prepared another one of your excellent PowerPoint presentations, and why don't you take us through that? And this is going to be about the dark left and the crazy goings-on at the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings.
Yeah, and I always make the distinction that the left are liberals and conservatives and moderates. That's all good, healthy, constitutional public discourse. Excuse me, and that's something we all should encourage. But there's a dark left that will lie, cheat, steal, and in some cases, I think, take some people out. And that's what I'm referring to here. This is an operation by the dark left to take out this man because of what he represents and what he may stop in the deep state or the swamp. So the Kavanaugh hearings, this is a seminal moment in this country because we're witnessing the deep state swamp or the dark left come out into full view with bold-faced lies, not just from the so-called victim and her attorneys, but elected senators in the confirmation hearings lying like a pole dog. And it's astounding. People are disgusted and they're fed up. What I want to go through here is why this is happening to Kavanaugh. It's not Kavanaugh the man, it's Kavanaugh and what he represents that they want to destroy. So let's talk about what it means. Now I've got, what we want to find out are Christine Blasey Ford's accusations. Are they credible? We're going to talk about that. Anybody that's watched the hearings that has any sort of background in law or law enforcement are laughing at these hearings. The problem is they're being presented by CNN and others as this credible victimized witness, and they're only hearing one side, and so that's all they're believing. So what else is new with CNN and MSNBC? But it's very serious because it's propaganda. And then I want to talk about her attorneys. I am absolutely convinced she has been coached before her testimony, how to act, what to say. That's a violation of DC bar regulations. There may be an investigation there. And then, of course, she was polygraphed and she passed. Boy, would I love to get my mitts on that, the results of that test. As far as I understand, it was 2 questions. And on a polygraph exam, having given a lot of them for the CIA, the questions that you ask are critical. If you ask a broad question, a person can lie to that and not react. They got to be very specific, and there's got to be, well, if it's one question, it has to be so refined and so specific that there's no way around it. So I'd like for them to examine this polygraph. It has to be conducted by a professional in the proper room with the proper surroundings, on and on and on it goes. I think if they wanted to be fair, I think they should polygraph her again. So that means nothing, and polygraphs are wrong 80% of the time. But of course, they're holding that out there, but not letting anybody see what the so-called examiner actually did. And I mentioned before, these people, Chuck Schumer, kind of the poster man of the dark left, I mean, they're bold-faced lying to the American people. And in a constitutional government with the Senate and the Congress are only representatives, that's serious that these people would stoop this low to do that kind of thing. And so I want to go through some things with folks, and I just want to mention how much we appreciate our sponsors, because we got a really great, awesome community of people out there that are watching these things, and that means a lot to me, and I know it does to you. So let's talk about why is this attack going on? What is behind this? Because what is important more than anything is why this is going on and why they're after Kavanaugh and who's doing it. So is Christine Blasey Ford, is she a victim, or is she committing multiple attempts at perjury? And we'll see. We'll look at some of that. So I'm on the body language slide now. Yeah, there you are. Okay, great. Now this lady, there's a lot of people don't know about this lady. She's trained. She's a trained so-called psychologist, and she's trying to control her body language. Now I have a master's in forensic psychophysiology from CIA DoD training. When you try to control your body language, even if you know what you're doing, you'll overcompensate, and it's obvious that you are doing that, which is another indication of a lie. She also teaches that sort of thing at the university, polygraph tests, body language. She teaches that, she knows it, so She is so controlled during the interview that well, it would be funny if it wasn't in that particular venue. We know that she coached as a so-called expert on that. She coached a friend on how to take and probably beat the polygraph exam. That friend was applying for a federal job. I am absolutely convinced she's been coached by her attorneys. I think that's blatantly obvious. I'm going to get into her attorneys in a little bit here and some of their background, and you'll see they have every reason to prop this woman up as kind of part of what they're trying to do. So I think that the dark left at all levels really thought they found the perfect choice in this lady, being a doctor, being a professor, knowing body language. They thought they had a real live one that they could use to shut this down, and I think it's backfiring badly. And Jason, please feel free to jump in with questions or comments or things you want to add, and just jump on in there, and that'd be fine with me.
Sure thing.
So, is she really a victim, or is she committing perjury, or does she really believe this, or has she convinced herself? Is she lying to herself? You know, there's a lot of possibilities here, but if you look at this from the point of view of an investigator, which we always do, the first thing she did was cited a very close friend as being present when this happened, and said that this close friend was actually recovering from an illness, so she couldn't come and testify. That close friend comes out and says, that never happened. I wasn't there, and I resent her throwing my name around with something that didn't happen. So we started there. Now she can't remember the time, the place, or the people that were there, the room, its proximity to the campus, or anything. Now, and I've had some people, listen to some people, actual rape victims, that will tell you, man, if you have been raped or assaulted, that is so burned into your mind, it'll haunt you for years. And yet she can't remember any of the basic details of this thing. I'll tell you, if I was polygraphing her, I would just have a fantastic time doing it, because it's so obvious. We know that her attorneys had her change her story 2, maybe 3 times. She would testify, then she wouldn't testify. She was going to fly, then she wouldn't fly, and back and forth and back and forth. Misrepresenting the truth in the case, and I think trying to get her to prop her up to testify. And it goes on and on. There's so much here. If this was a court of law, maybe 2 days and it would be over. There would be a big legal boot that would kick her out of the courtroom. It's just ridiculous. But we're not in the proper legal venue. This is a kangaroo trial being perpetrated by the dark left to take out what Brett Kavanaugh represents. So, and we've seen the protesters, right? Well, guess who? Here we go again. The protesters are paid for by none other than the great progressive socialist George Soros. And we know that because these protesters are using the exact same chants that they've used in past Soros protests, pre-printed signs. They're saying the same things that they did in other protests sponsored by Soros. They're using these scripted chants that they've been provided. Planned Parenthood, the edifice of abortion, has put people in there protesting. I think they've got $500 million a year. I think it's more than that to lose if this doesn't go their way. And then you've just got the dark left progressives that want any sort of cultural, ethical basis in the United States gone, so anything goes. But a lot of these people, these protesters, are plants, and some of them are being paid. This is what the dark left does. They lie, they pay protesters. They will do anything to stay in power, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, I want to throw this in, because these people claim themselves to be progressives, and I want people to understand what a progressive is and what progressivism stands for. Each one of these people, Schumer, Feinstein, Hillary Clinton, on and on and on it goes. These people consider themselves and brag about being progressives. But let me go through what the progressive platform here. The most concerning thing is progressives have what they call an evolving idea of government. And what they want is what they call a living constitution, one that can be changed at their whim to fit the times, specifically targeting the First Amendment. They want government to take on whatever size and role is the current demand of the population. They want government to grow to fit the needs of the population. Sounds, well, it is socialist, almost Stalinist, totalitarian. In some cases it is. They want to move beyond what they call the limited perspective of the founding fathers. You know, white privilege. They're all white males, so they're automatically twisted and biased and bigoted. And since they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, well, it's got to go because it was written by white Europeans. That is one of the favorite tactics of the dark left, to use multicultural diversity instead of EEO, which we all support. They use multicultural diversity as a kind of Marxism to shut down the Judeo-Christian foundation of the United States. That is a fact, and their number one enemy is the white male conservative who they despise. That's the enemy of progressivism. If you can imagine, they disagree with the Declaration of Independence. Now, they're disagreeing with the things that gave them the freedom to be morons, frankly. They're disagreeing with the very documents that give them the freedom to do this sort of thing. The Constitution, the founders believed that the purpose of government is to protect the individual and natural rights. In other words, their God-given rights. That's what the Constitution is all about, protecting us from the government. That's why they wrote the Bill of Rights. Well, they think that the Declaration of Independence, again, is outdated, written by bigoted people, and it's got to go away. It's just now it's a philosophical, funny document. These people believe this stuff. They disagree with the current Constitution. You'll never see a constitutionalist like me probably speak at any sort of democratic function. I haven't been invited yet, and I think if I would, I'd wear a armor, a vest, or something. But they disagree with the Constitution itself, because it places limitations on the scope and the power of government. They don't want that. They want government to rule. They want government to dictate people's lives. They want the federal government to run the states. So I want everyone to understand what progressivism is. It is not just we're going to change with the times kind of thing. Not at all. It is democratic socialism. We'll talk about that a little bit later. These people believe in this stuff 100%. And they're willing to do just about anything they can to see this government become a democratic social government. There's just no doubt about it.
Now, Kevin, just to interject, it's interesting to me to note the psychology of naming this progressivism. It seems to me that a lot of these subversive psychological operations like to take a name that's sort of the exact opposite of what they actually intend. George Soros, open society, stuff like that. So it's interesting to note when that's done, and hopefully you can speak a bit about the CIA philosophy of doing that. But I also wanted to bring it to your attention that we've got Lucky here in the Discord comments saying, why is everyone shilling for Kavanaugh? All the people that are supposed to be constitutionalists and against the deep state, this guy is a DC judge. I think what Lucky is trying to point out that under George W. Bush, Kavanaugh did a lot of things that were not exactly in the interests of constitutionalists. Can you address that valid question?
Yeah, Lucky is right. Kavanaugh was not the first choice of a lot of constitutionalists, and humbly myself included. And he's kind of been connected to some deep state administrations in the past. They put him forth thinking that he'd be an easier sell than the lady that probably, in my opinion, would have been better. So Lucky's right. He's not the perfect candidate to go on here, but he's still, and that's the whole point of our discussion tonight. It's not about Brett Kavanaugh, and he's not the choice. I know he's not the choice of most constitutionalists, Rand Paul and myself and some others at all. But it's not about him. It's about what he represents to the dark left and to them, and they're trying to destroy him. So I think Lucky's right.
Yeah, and you know, just to address it from my perspective, I didn't want him to be confirmed when this started, you know, based on conversations with you and Larry Klayman and other people who know his history and the Constitution far better than I do. But a strange thing has happened. And frankly, Kevin, it's the same exact thing that happened with me and President Trump, where I started out thinking, well, this is not the guy for me. But because they were so mistreated and because their rights were so abused and because the fair process was so bastardized and corrupted, it drew me to defend those people. And now I feel the left's actions and the Democratic senators' actions have been so repugnant that the only appropriate response is to just completely smack down their response and confirm the guy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's like the Democratic propaganda arm And my kind of personal philosophy, if you want to know something about a man or a woman, look who hates their guts. Find out who hates them. And that'll tell you a lot about that person. Well, we know who hates Donald Trump.
Yeah.
They're trying to impeach him. They've made threats against his family and his kids, his son. Just despicable things that some comics and show hosts have said, and some members of the media. Just disgusting and despicable. That kind of tells me that Donald Trump is a threat to the deep state. And I know he is. I know some of the things he's doing against the shadow government that no president since John F. Kennedy has ever done. So I wound up supporting him because of that. And I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. But what he's doing is he is shaking that place up in Washington, D.C., doing things that I dreamed about regarding the shadow government for decades.
I think he's doing a great job. So tell us some more about this propaganda arm.
Well, the propaganda arm is back in the CIA. Of course, we dealt when the Soviet Union and the USSR was in place when I first came into the CIA, and those were crazy days because the Cold War was red hot, and we were facing up against the KGB, and sometimes just a few feet away. But the oldest propaganda trick in the book is to label, just like you said, label your enemy what you are. And you remember what the CIA did with the JFK assassination was they labeled, it started there, the CIA labeled anybody that disagreed with the Warren Commission as a conspiracy theorist. That's where that term started. They're still using it today. Oh, that's just a conspiracy theory to shut down any investigation and any further discussion like 9/11, where a criminal investigation was never done. And the media throws that around because to your average couch spud, it worked. But Islamophobia, if you're against radical Islam blowing up people in buses and you want to take that farther to cultural jihad, you're an Islamophobe. Or if you question anything, even if it's factual and evidentiary, then they're going to label you the opposite of what you are, a conservative. You know, what is a conservative? Whether I'm a conservative or not, I know I tend to believe in kind of ethical, moral things, especially coming from where I come from. But one of the most favorite tools of propaganda for both the Soviet Union and even Russia now and us is labeling your enemy and getting it out there in as many news outlets as you can, and you repeat it enough and people start to believe it.
Right. All right, back to the slides.
Yeah, so speaking of propaganda, and I just want to out them right here. And for people that, I hope there are people watching that are progressives, that are Democrats. I really, really, really do. Because if they look at this stuff and then go out and search on their own, they're going to see it. CNN is unbelievable in what they're doing and what they have done. They have not reported any of the lies, change of stories, or conflicts in Dr. Ford's testimony. They've reported on none of that. They've come out saying they all believe her in a kangaroo court. And the people that only watch CNN are convinced that these allegations are true when they're not founded in fact at all. And they use terms like we believe, we think, we feel. In other words, we have no evidence. But when somebody says they believe something or they feel, or that's an automatic red flag that they don't have any facts to back it up. And of course, all the stories are pro-Ford and the DNC and anti-GOP, these ogres that want to put him in the court and change America, and push grandma off the cliff and put everybody in the back alley, the same garbage. And as you and I have talked about in previous programs, CNN and others are parroting talking points given to them by the shadow government and the deep state that are filtering them, giving them information. And since it comes from the CIA and nobody wants to challenge that, they just parrot it right out to the American people. The CIA seeds information to the Associated Press overseas. That bounces back to CNN, and they take it as true, and they're publishing government talking points. So we have got a propaganda operation against the American people in this country. And you know me well enough, Jason, know I detest that kind of thing in a free government, a free society like ours. There's no tolerance for that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's an affront to democracy, real democracy. These people, the Democratic National Committee, I'll get into this in a second, all they want to do is win at all costs, all capitalized. They don't care what they have to do. They despise traditional America, especially patriotic constitutionalists, with a deep-seated hatred. I mean, these people, they function in the emotional realm and not in the intellectual, many of them. Doesn't matter what sort of training or education they have. I've met some PhDs that were absolute morons that didn't bother to check into what they were talking about. So their education's got nothing to do with it if they're thinking with their with their emotions. They mock the Judeo foundation of our country this is not a religious discussion by any stretch, but that is the foundation of the writers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And a lot of our criminal justice system, the court system, comes from those principles. And we still have the freest society and the strongest, most prosperous government in the history of mankind because of that. Well, they despise that, and they despise the Constitution itself because it limits what they want to do. The editors, as we know, and the reporters of these news outlets, I think 80% of them are progressives and vote and contribute to Hillary Clinton and other Obama and other Democratic candidates. They're progressives openly. And so is there bias there? It's more than bias. It's a way of thinking. You've got all of this as part, when they phase over into this stuff, they're becoming the dark left as far as I'm concerned. And I came up with that term just to stress that the dark left is not liberals and even people to the left of center. I'm talking about these people who, and in the DNC, that will do anything dark they have to get in power. And I just call it the dark left because I think it's separate. Who's the target of this? Is it Brett Kavanaugh, the man? We don't want Brett Kavanaugh in there because we don't like his past rulings in the court. We don't like Kavanaugh on there because we think he's too emotional in his testimony. No, that's not what it is about at all. Kavanaugh, in his testimony, when asked questions, stated for the record that he believes in the rule of law in the United States. That's constitutional law is what he's talking about. That's one of the reasons that they hate his guts, because if he gets on the court, he's going to rule as a strict constitutionalist, despite his affiliations with, well, the Bush administration and others. And the one that they despise most of all, he's in favor of protecting the unborn. And we all want the government not to tell women what to do, or anyone for that matter. But when it comes to rampant abortion and getting millions and millions a year for doing it and lying to women, without them knowing what's really going on, it's a multi-million-dollar industry. They do not want him on the court because of that. You could probably pop that up to the top of the list, but certainly one of the strongest ones. He's openly said that he is for and stands behind American sovereignty. Now, you would think most Americans would be, yeah, absolutely right on. But no, these people, they despise American sovereignty. They're progressive globalists. So this guy's they see in their own minds, he's gonna destroy the anti-sovereignty movement. And Soros, who is a big anti-U.S. sovereignty advocate, who said it publicly, is funding these people because that's part of his goal, to destroy U.S. sovereignty and make it part of the global community. That is so dangerous. If America went that way, thank God it's not now, it would be the end of our freedom, constitutional freedom as we know. And then we got this ridiculous one. He's had white privilege all his life, and they're having classes now on white privilege. One just came out yesterday where they're making the white students sit down and put chains and shackles on them during the class to teach them that they're no longer privileged. Well, excuse me, but I thought EEO was no discrimination based on sex, gender, ethnic background, or anything, and that they're doing the exact opposite of what they say they're for. So they're trying to hit him with white privilege. That's a propaganda term that they're trying to use, and it's happening in universities right now. People need to challenge that. They need to stand up against that because it's a bunch of baloney, and it is discrimination of the worst kind. Well, not the worst kind. All discrimination is bad. In America's past, we've had some pretty terrible discrimination, but it's discrimination nonetheless. We're supposed to abhor that sort of thing. Anything that goes against the dark left, they will destroy. In their minds, in their emotions, Judge Kavanaugh goes against the dark left's goal, some of which I've just gone through. Last but not least, he's a Trump nominee. And we all know their gut-level hatred for Donald Trump and what he's doing to the swamp. Yeah. So just being a Trump nominee is enough for them wanting to destroy this guy and his family. So it's not Kavanaugh that's the target. It's what Kavanaugh stands for that's the target.
I agree with that, Kevin. I think that's maybe even something that deserves being higher up on the list, because it just seems that they're dedicated to destroying Donald Trump's presidency, denying any of the, frankly, astounding progress that he's made. North Korea and South Korea, during the course of this confirmation hearing made an announcement that they've begun to denuclearize the peninsula. And South Korea has announced with President Trump a historic trade deal. There's a replacement for NAFTA. There's an amazing array of things that Trump has been doing. And here we are talking about whether or not Brett Kavanaugh threw a drink at somebody after a UB40 concert when he was 18. It's absolutely absurd. Now, let me share with you some questions relevant to Mr. Kavanaugh from our supporters here on Discord. Amy is bringing up the point, what about Kavanaugh's emotional and combative behavior? It was a good test of his ability to keep his cool. I don't think he has the right temperament to be an associate Supreme Court justice because of his inability to rein it in on this issue. Now, before I get your opinion on this, Kevin, I'd like to share my own view that I think this was an unfair test of Mr. Kavanaugh's temperament because we saw him there talking about how this has affected his children, his 8 and 10 or something, his young daughters, who are now being told that their father is a rapist, even though the accusations of gang rape have been corroborated by no one. The woman who made those allegations has had multiple of her personal associates come forward and say that she's lied about things in the past. And just on the surface, it seems totally incongruent with a person, whether you know that person or not. It doesn't seem to me that someone who'd be so studious in high school that they would be able to be admitted to Yale and be so successful in their college career that they could become not just a lawyer, but a judge, a federal judge, and now a candidate for the Supreme Court. Now, I never went to law school. My academic course in college was in filmmaking, decidedly less academic than someone studying law. And it seems to me that someone who is that busy at studying and doing all that stuff, it would be difficult to fit in all this gang raping. It doesn't seem to match on the surface. So I don't think it's a fair test of the man's temperament. How do you feel about that, Kevin?
Well, first of all, thank you for that Democratic talking point. I've heard that probably 6 times coming out of the DNC and some Democratic senators. That is a talking point. And I can tell you this, when someone is truthful, having interviewed many people, it's a truthful response. When someone attacks your family, attacks your character, attacks your kids, it is a truthful response to get really upset about it. Frankly, I thought that was a good sign. And the Democrats are trying to make it look like it's a bad sign. That's baloney. Now, I have seen people in my own polygraph exams, when they're lying, they start crying. It's a common tactic, body language tactic, to cover up lying when you start crying like you're so hurt. So no, that's a Democratic talking point. Sorry, it just is, and it's completely erroneous.
It's also probably worth mentioning that there is no circumstance in the Supreme Court where Mr. Kavanaugh would be involved in a proceeding that he himself is personally accused in. So it's a totally out of context situation that doesn't necessarily correlate to anything he'd be doing in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. It's a propaganda talking point. Simple as that. And you know me, Jason, I just tell it like it is, whatever. So, okay, now I want to stress, and we've talked about this before, this is not the Democratic Party of JFK. My family were JFK Democrats. The DNC is not the same party as JFK. If there are Democrats listening to this, please hear me and go in and read what the DNC stands for now and the groups that it supports and funds. It is not the Democratic Party it used to be. And Democrats, especially, if they care, need to look into that and find out what the DNC has become. They will win, as I've mentioned a couple of times, they'll win at all costs, including destroying a man and his family in a kangaroo court publicly, and that's what they're doing. And the DNC has got a strategy that it's used successfully for 30 years, and what they do is they reach out to include all the victims groups that have chips on their shoulders, are disgruntled against the current American sovereignty, and they bring them all into their party. Socialist groups, the entire abortion up to the 9th month of pregnancy group, they bring them in. Black Lives Matter, which was started by a lie in Ferguson, nobody cares about that. They bring them in. George Soros funded Media Matters, come on in. Anti-police, that movement, Antifa and others, come on in. and on and on and on it goes. This is what the DNC considers its power base and is reaching out, and not just including these groups, they're paying them to do it. And that's what the DNC has become, and worse. It is now a Democratic Socialist Party. That is not an understatement. I would encourage people to go out and check what that means. And then we have this. Most people, a lot of people don't have the spine to talk about this, but then we have the abortion edifice. This big, I think it's in the billions, more than millions edifice that they will do anything to ensure continues. These are millions and millions going into Planned Parenthood and their affiliates, and they do not want anything to challenge that edifice and its sacrificial lamb, the unborn child. When I saw an abortion at the 9th month, I couldn't believe it, and I consider myself, I don't know, I'm an independent, and I'm more of an analyst than anything else. I couldn't believe that someone could justify birthing a baby's head and then cutting its spine with a scalpel. Come on, man. What has happened to our country? Well, it's propaganda. They've been lied to, as we know. Given terms, oh, this is a women's issue, and on and on. And women, they don't know better if they listen to some of these things. And they think, yeah, that's right, but they don't realize that this is a multi-million-dollar globalist movement. It's a population control movement, and people, especially women, and they need to understand that. A lot of ladies are getting upset because of that. They lie. You watch these hearings, and you see these people like Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein lie without even blinking an eye. Lying for them, that's not an ethical issue. That's an end, a means. An end that justifies the means. If they have to lie to stay in power, they'll do it. And anybody in our audience that has watched these characters for any period of time will just see them lie after lie after lie. I used to teach a class on detecting deception, and politicians were one of my best examples. And I'd bring them up and show where they were lying and how they were lying. They lie for a living. These people lie as an ideology. Now, if your fundamental principle is lying and twisting the truth, we got a real problem with you in any sort of government office, to say the least. They are encouraging, Maxine Waters and others, violent protests. Eric Holder, Loretta Lynch, encouraging violent protests against the Trump administration. And we're seeing those. We're seeing people heckled, slapped, their hats taken off, kicked, punched. Government officials, congressmen have to get bodyguards now. We've seen them do it to Sarah Huckabee Sanders in that restaurant in Lynchburg, Virginia, which I understand is having problems now, but they're encouraging violence, and this, in my humble opinion, brewing undercurrent of civil war in this country. They're pushing it. They're pushing it to the limit. I think they want it to happen, and the analogy I like to use is the conservatives, the constitutionalists, the patriots are like a big sleeping grizzly bear, and they're out there by the millions. That's what happened when Donald Trump was elected. They're out there by the millions, and they're being poked by this stuff. This Kavanaugh hearing has got a lot of people upset, and this blue wave propaganda, I think they're probably going to get a surprise in November, because people, after they thought this hearing was going to give them votes, it's going to backfire, because they're showing the world who they are.
I agree with that backfire concept. You know, speaking to the abortion point, I noticed something. There was a lot of news that came out during the confirmation hearing that basically got buried. So perhaps that was another piece of the agenda to override some of the other things. But I believe President Trump canceled some sort of program where the various body parts of aborted fetuses were purchased by the federal government for experimentation and medical use, etc. And President Trump canceled that. So I believe there is a way to find an appropriate middle ground between allowing women to choose what's done with their bodies, but not having taxpayer dollars support related programs when many of those taxpayers object to that.
Yes, and that's the propaganda side. Nobody, and I'm not a politician, nobody wants to touch a women's right or women's health or emergency pregnancies. No one has ever even said they want to do that. But that's the only, 99% I think of abortions are for convenience or personal reasons, and the life of the mother and the problems with the fetus, that's like 1% of the whole thing. So it's another propaganda thing. No one wants to take away women's rights. Nobody, especially me, wants the government to have its hands on any a person in the United States. Government is supposed to serve us, not the other way around. So the people that are against these horrific abortions and selling baby parts, they're not trying to take away women's rights. That is a bold-faced propaganda lie. And as I mentioned before, I hate propaganda and that sort of thing because it's contrary to the truth. So let's move on. When you got me on, you're just going to get. I'll tell it the way it is. Anyway.
I'm riling you up a little bit.
Well, no, I tell you, it's time for people to stop being cowards. And I don't want to make, we don't want to be political in our offices and things, but no one wants to bring these issues up amongst friends and family because it'll make them unpopular. And the opposite, it couldn't be farther from the truth. And they are. Americans need to stand up to all this dark left garbage and say, that's enough. We've been, the problem, I think, for the last 30 years is good, hardworking Americans just trying to survive. They're not prone to violence, and they're just trying to survive. And up until now, they just let these people get away with this stuff. But I think that has changed. I think they poked the bear, and I think the bear is mad. These people, Schumer and Feinstein, who I had personal interaction with when she covered up a case and other things on the Intelligence Committee with her Chinese plant driver. Yes. She was one of the people I sent my evidence to, and she just sat on it. Anyway,
wow.
These deep state people like her and Schumer, they're terrified by this, by Trump, and people that support Trump. There are Republicans that are terrified. Rhinos are terrified of Trump because these people, some of them have got some things to hide.
What's interesting, Kevin, as you're speaking right now, it's occurring to me that, everyone is throughout the country, and we even see it here in the Discord comments, everyone is so caught up in the emotional aspects of this case.
Right.
Is Kavanaugh too defensive? Should sexual assault victims have the right to be believed? And we're getting away from the stuff that we should be talking about, like Dianne Feinstein had a spy working for her. Why are we talking about this withheld statement from a possible witness when we should be talking about her subverting the government? Additionally, the attorneys surrounding this witness are the same. I'm thinking of this guy Bromwich, who is Andrew McCabe's attorney, who this whole thing seems connected to defending Andrew McCabe, who was one of the key players in trying to destroy the Trump presidency, surveilling Trump, the candidate. It's pretty critical that we examine these attorneys.
Oh, it was a soft coup against a president-elect and now a sitting president, a soft coup of which McCabe was part. Bromwich, he's still representing him, by the way. And that's what is going on here is the swamp, the deep state shadow government. They're terrified because they're starting to unravel for the first time in 60 years. They're starting to be called into the limelight and called into question, and they're trying to do whatever they can to stop it. Some of these people, it's a gut ideology. For others, they got some stuff to hide. There is, I've got some people. There is a blackmail ring in Congress on Capitol Hill, and it's been going on for some time. So you have to wonder about some of these people and why they do these things. But in any event, the lying and the manipulation and twisting and the assistance of the soft coup and the false Russian narrative they're just coming out in the plain view. And let me mention this, Jason. What they don't talk about ever is the 4.2 million SF-71 OPM employment documents that China hacked on American government workers, including me. And if you know anything about an SF-71, it's kind of embarrassing. You have to put all your personal information on there. China's got it. They can trace who eventually went to work for the CIA or whatever, depending on what job they applied for, their background, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities.
Wow.
And what just came out is Apple and some other companies have been concealing the fact that China has planted tiny little devices in the factories that make some of their circuits. And this technology is out there. I talk about this a lot in terms of the shadow government. These back doors are a little bit bigger than the head of a pin.
Wow.
And they've been put in these circuits, and the Chinese have been going in through Apple and other phones and other systems and collecting data from these things. That just came out, I think, yesterday. So where's all the outrage for China? They have us by the proverbial ankles, and this is just a diversion. They don't want to talk about that because they've been involved, frankly. Bill Clinton and others actually took money from the Chinese government for their campaigns, and they sure don't want that to come out. So,
wow.
That's huge.
That is.
All right. Are we having fun yet?
Absolutely.
I know I am. I mean, this stuff is just, and I know that there's millions of Americans out there that have watched that have just had it. So you brought up a real good point. Let's talk about the attorneys. Now, I love this picture because do you think she's been coached? If you look,
Yeah,
I mean,
they're all standing around smiling. How
yeah,
well she
holding
did.
her hand. And now this picture was done in public. Could you imagine what's going on in private? Well, there's
Right.
indication just through some of the statements and changes in stories that she has been coached by her attorneys, and I think there may be a D.C. bar investigation into that because it's against the law. So I'm convinced she was coached. Other people can make their own assessment of that. And you mentioned Bromwich. Bromwich was nominated by Bill Clinton as the Inspector General for the Justice Department. Now, if you remember from future or past programs, rather, that you and I have had, what Bill Clinton did is he placed judges, DOJ officials in place that he knew, James Comey being one, that he knew would protect he and Hillary later if they got caught doing what they were doing. And Bromwich was one of those people. Now, it gets even worse. Of course, he's contributed to the Democrats, Obama, Hillary's presidential campaign. He's made donations to the Democratic National Committee. He's got the freedom to do all of that, but it just reveals his identity. But this is funny. The bottom bullet that I have there, he was the Justice Department's former Inspector General under Clinton, and now he's representing Andrew McCabe as the lawyer against the current DOJ Inspector General. Conflict of interest? Maybe. So it just shows you how stinky the swamp gets in Washington, D.C., and this is the tip of the iceberg.
Well,
Let's go on.
It causes me to wonder, Kevin, is he aware of some of the things that McCabe was doing, and he's the lawyer to cover those things, and now if this grand jury that's investigating McCabe moves forward and McCabe gets prosecuted, perhaps Bromwich, as the IG of the previous administration or whatever, perhaps he himself could be implicated in wrongdoing.
I don't think that'll happen, but you would think so. In a just system, you would think so. I'm sure he'll continue to represent him, knowing full well that McCabe was part of the deep state coup against the president. And these people, based on their ideology, they hate Trump anyway. So, and he's still representing McCabe as we speak, and I'm sure he will all the way up if he's indicted. Let's talk about the other attorneys, because an attorney and their background is really important. I have this concept, a person's halo, and I don't mean that in a ephemeral sense. A person's halo will say a lot about who they are. Halo meaning their actions, what they do other than what they say, the memberships they belong to, their associates, and other things will tell you a lot about a person that they won't say verbally because they don't want that to be known. But Deborah Katz, she was the one that strongly defended Bill Clinton against Paula Jones to try to shut down Paula Jones's accusations of all things sexual harassment, and it was actual sexual harassment. I think if I'm getting this correct, Bill Clinton eventually settled for $800,000. If it was a fake allegation with no evidence, why the settlement?
Right.
So, but Deborah Katz is right there trying to protect Clinton from those allegations, and now she's representing a sexual harassment case with less evidence. You got to scratch your head about that one. Of course, she donated to Obama's presidential campaign and also Hillary's 2016 presidential campaign. She's a very pro-Hillary person. And this is what she said about the advisors to President Donald Trump, and I'm going to quote. Let me put my glasses on because I want people to hear this. This is what Deborah Katz said of Trump's advisors. Quote, "These people are all miscreants. The term basket of deplorables is far too generous a description for these people who are now senior Trump advisors." That is what she said about the deplorables out there that support Donald Trump. That'll show you the extreme ideology of this woman, which may be affecting her legal counsel in a way that perhaps could be illegal. Now, Lisa Banks has been out there as an attorney for quite a while, and she's got a pretty good record generally about handling cases. But she said this when she got a hold of this case, when they said, "Well, we want Dr. Ford to come and testify before Congress, since you're taking apart Brett Kavanaugh." And this is what she said. Her response to that was, "Having the accuser testify under oath at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing would be, quote, contrary to the committee discovering the truth." That's what Lisa Banks said.
That's the one honest thing any attorney has said throughout this proceeding.
That's right. Yeah, she just came right out and said what their agenda was. We'll let that quote just hang in the air for a moment. Coaching, bias, possibly illegal activity on the part of the attorneys. I think that's very possible. All right, moving on. From what I have heard and being told, there are 3 investigations being pursued. Lindsey Graham, and I've never been a real great fan of Lindsey Graham, but he came out and just gave an impressive oration of this garbage and accusations and lack of evidence, and stated, and some other GOPers with a spine joined in. And it looks like there's going to be 3 investigations that are going to be pursued, and there should be. The FBI has got to investigate felony lying to Congress under oath. In other words, that's an accuser making false claims under oath to the United States Congress. That's a felony or multiple felonies if it's done more than once. It looks like there's going to be a congressional investigation into Feinstein's handling of the Ford letter, which he dropped as a bomb right before Kavanaugh was about to go up for a vote. What a coincidence. Now, she claimed she didn't leak it. One of her staffers did. You know how that goes. Wink, wink. You know what to do. You can't. If the staffer did it, she's responsible, and she was right in it. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. And lastly, as I mentioned a couple times, Dr. Ford's attorneys, the D.C. bar, we hope, will look into their attorneys' conduct in terms of coaching, getting their client to lie and change her story. That is illegal. Those are felonies. It's grounds for disbarment. So my understanding is these 3 investigations are being pursued. If they're not, then we've got a bunch of cowards in our Congress. But the passion that I've seen and from what I've heard, it looks like these are going to go forward. All right. Now, this is a quote I want to read. These people, unashamedly, and that's fine, call themselves democratic socialists, right? That sounds kind of innocent. But listen to this quote. Ludwig von Mises was an economist and social philosopher. Quote, the champions of socialism call themselves progressives, but they recommend a system that is characterized, and I think I've got something over the quote there. Stand by, there he is. That is characterized by, Jason, is there any way you could, hold on, let me see if I got a screen right over the quote there. Hold on just a moment. Good, are you still there?
Yes.
Gotcha, okay, here we go, I got it. I had to get some things off the screen. Quote, the champions of socialism call themselves progressives, but they recommend a system which is characterized by rigid observance of routine and by a resistance to every kind of improvement. They call themselves liberals, but they are intent upon abolishing liberty. They call themselves Democrats, but they yearn for dictatorship. They call themselves revolutionaries, but they want to make the government omnipotent. They promise the blessings of the Garden of Eden, but they plan to transform the world into a gigantic post office. Every man but one a subordinate clerk in a bureau. What an alluring utopia. What a noble cause to fight. I thought that was a great quote because that's what a democratic socialist is. They're not democratic people. That's another term. They spend lots of times with focus groups coming up with these terms, and they run them by people and how they react. And when they find a good one that snags people emotionally, they use it. And this is one of them.
You know what I find strange about that term democratic socialist, Kevin, is that when you first hear it, you're like, well, socialism, it's like you got communism, oh, that's bad. Socialism, it's like, well, maybe that's got certain aspects. I mean, we want the government to control the police and the fire department and all that. And then democratic socialism, it's trying to draw people into the middle of something where they feel like maybe this is a good compromise. I think, I was just in Sweden last weekend speaking to Ole Damagard and speaking to Biljana Martinovsky and a couple of locals I met there in Sweden. There is a huge political crisis going on in Sweden. Yeah. Multiple people told me absolutely no freedom of speech. A 65-year-old woman has been incarcerated for a Facebook post in which she described an Islamic group that attacked her, and she's been jailed for hate speech. Kevin, do you know who's been in charge of the government in Sweden for the past several decades?
Does it start with an S?
Swedish Democratic Socialists.
Socialists, yeah. Yeah, and that socialism, all of us are for helping the poor and Medicare and the elderly. And my wife and I are involved in a lot of that. And so was Judge Kavanaugh. We all want that. I mean, there's absolutely no question. The government's job is to take care of the people in the case of Medicare and Medicaid and all these other programs that are good and beneficial. And that's not what this is. This is the totalitarian rule of government, making people just a number and a statistic for their version of what government is, and the virtual elimination of freedom of speech, like Sweden. And anybody that questions these so-called tolerant people, they'll lock them up or shut them down or take them off Facebook, and all kinds of other Stalinist kinds of tactics that we never thought we would see, not only in this country, but now Sweden is gone way down that road.
Yes, and multiple people who I met in Sweden who were Swedish told me they're leaving. They're moving out of the country because they feel like it's so far gone that there's no recovery. Now, I've met people throughout my life who come from various countries, South America, Africa, certain places where perhaps the government is not so organized and there's blatant corruption and difficult climate, and they just hate the country that they're from and want to leave. But Sweden is not really one of those countries. Most people from Sweden are very patriotic and have a love of the culture and the land. And there was a real sadness there from the people who told me that the country is so far gone that it can't be recovered. I mean, that's a heavy, heavy thing to contemplate. I really hope we never get to that point, but people told me they felt that it was beyond recovery. That's scary.
It is scary, and we better be careful because it's happening here, and we're seeing it in full view, and that's why it's time. And you know, we know that November 6th is coming up. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I've been both. I'm an independent because I can't stand either party. But what they want to do is the dark left, especially, and the DNCs. They want to take over the Congress and the Senate for one reason and one reason only: to impeach Donald Trump and stop these things he's doing against the deep state. That's what they want to do. I would encourage you. I'm going to do it. Go out and vote against these people. Vote Republican. I'm probably going to have to hold my nose when I pull the lever for some rhinos. But I don't want the dark left to get into power.
Yeah.
And we'll deal with the rhinos later. As a matter of fact, you and I will probably deal with them on a future program. Right. But people, they have got to understand this is so critical. We're on the precipice of a brewing undercurrent of civil war that is targeting our Constitution right now. And the Kavanaugh trial is so important because it's coming out into full view for everyone to see.
So, Kevin, now that the FBI report is out and Senator Grassley and his colleagues have confirmed that no one was able to corroborate these allegations from Christine Blasey Ford, a lot of our viewers here on Discord want to know if you feel there are possible charges or civil ramifications that the doctor might face for these false accusations, or are they even considered false accusations simply because they haven't been corroborated?
Well, I think there's a good possible suit for multiple cases of libel and slander against Judge Kavanaugh. You take this to a libel court, they have destroyed his reputation, past, present, and future, intentionally, with no facts. That's the definition of libel and slander. And yes, and I think, frankly, she deserves it. And I hope maybe her attorneys will deserve an investigation, or they do deserve an investigation also. That is what libel and slander is: intentionally destroying somebody's lives through statements and actions to purposely attack them without any evidence to back it up. And that's what this is. That's what she's doing. She knows body language. She knows about lying. They thought she was going to do better than she did. But yeah, I think she should be real concerned about a very large libel suit.
Yeah. And, you know, President Trump is someone who, even just earlier this week, the New York Times published an article that included some of his personal tax information. None of that is public, FOIA-able information. So I've been told that the way the New York Times acquired that is almost certainly illegal. They also use certain language that, you know, I mean, creating a tax strategy and using an accountant, what I've observed in my own life is that if you have a lawyer or an accountant and you're dealing with a matter and then for whatever reason you take it to another lawyer or accountant, almost always, incidentally, this is true of visual effects artists, directors, whatever, they look at this stuff and they say, oh, no, no, all this is wrong. We have to throw this out and do it again. So everybody always has their view of how something should be interpreted. So when you're dealing with an accountant and they formulate a tax strategy, and granted, I've got nowhere near the level of money that some, super rich person who's gonna, like Donald Trump, probably has teams of accountants who deliberate and talk to lawyers. I mean, the guy's got so many complex business concerns. I'm sure lawyers could bill for years on end arguing about if what any particular billionaire did was legal or not legal. But the point is, if he's submitted it to the IRS and they have it, if there's a problem, they would take action.
Yes, I would encourage people to read that article, excuse me, very carefully, because stuck way, and they never put it up front, they stick it way down in the article, one line that says that both the courts and the IRS okayed those tax returns.
Yeah.
And the rest of the article tries to make it look like it committed fraud, and then they slip the fact in that the IRS looked at it and they said it was okay. There you go.
Yeah. I also find it really interesting, Kevin, that, here we've got a woman who comes into the court with no corroboration whatsoever and no credible witnesses with similar stories, no one who's known Mr. Kavanaugh for his entire life that says, yes, this is characteristic of his behavior. And they're, holding her up as a bastion of truth, someone who has the right to be believed. But then people who have become friends of this channel, including Juanita Broderick, who were actually raped, bitten, caused to bleed. I mean, full sexual intercourse, unwanted, violent rape, and she's ignored by Bill Clinton, and she's ignored.
Yep, that's the power of the Clinton crime syndicate. We've talked about that before. I want people to understand again, because I used to be a Democrat because that used to be the ideal, but it's the ideal no longer. As I've said a few times, it's not the party of JFK anymore. It's ruthless, it's aggressive, and in the case of the so-called dossier, it's criminal with money laundering and a soft coup against the president that the DNC was behind and laundered money for the whole thing. The Democratic Socialists, we've talked about that, progressives, and I'm just coming right out and say it. If people out there, especially if they're Democrats, and I say this with all grace and humility because I believe in democratic, the original ideals, if they have any ethics or values or love for this country, I've got one piece of humble advice: leave the DNC, for goodness sake. If you find out and know what they're really about. If you're a constitutionalist, for goodness sake, or a patriot, leave the DNC. You cannot reconcile those two. They've changed. They're different. They're democratic socialists now, and they are ruthless. They've engaged in criminal activity, lied over and over and over, to the point where it is shocking how many lies they get away with. So if somebody really wants to stand for this country, I'd say get out and leave.
Absolutely. The other thing I think that is really characteristic of this Kavanaugh hearing is something that we see in a lot of different forums. If there was a legitimate crime, like I think about someone who's been suing me, who I've been saying has engaged in charity fraud. I haven't wavered off of that because I'm unaware of any other potential crimes that person may have done, but I know he's done that. I have evidence to support that statement, and that is the primary focus of my issue with that person. I'm not coming up with 50 other things. I find it very curious that, as soon as it started to seem like, well, maybe there aren't other witnesses who can corroborate this, we immediately start to shift off of this accusation and towards the judge's demeanor. It's like they're always looking for the next thing.
Exactly.
And they want to create a scenario. I've observed this, Kevin. They want to do something that lures the judge into reacting and then make that reaction the new talking point.
Oh, you nailed it. That's one of their old time-tested procedures. Exactly. You nailed it. That's what they do.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I appreciate your insights. This has been another fantastic episode. I do want to remind people who are watching that they can learn more about Kevin by going to his website, fortheloveoffreedom.net. You can read all about Kevin's credentials, the cover-up. You can see links to his other YouTube interviews, and you're going to get access to the Shadow Code, which is a code that Kevin has devised that allows people who purchase his book from the Company of Shadows to actually decode the redacted portions of the book that the CIA illegally blacked out because they did not want the embarrassing details of their deep state stupidity coming to light. But Kevin has found a way around it. Kevin, is there anything you'd like to leave our viewers with tonight before we wrap it up?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Just be motivated, people. Get out there in November and stop these people from what they want to do. You know, it may not be pleasant at times, but gracefully talk to your friends and family and everybody else and say that this is a constitutional issue here and it's something that it's critical.
Thank you, Kevin. I agree completely. And the last thing I'll say is for our viewers who are watching on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, please remember to visit patreon.com/Kevin_ship with 2 P's. I could not do this program without Kevin, and I am honored to have him here with me. Thank you so much, Kevin, for creating this show. This has been the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. I want to thank all of our generous Patreon sponsors. We'll see you here next week.
Thank you, Jason.